They pointed at the garage like I was a guest in my own home. "No space inside, Dad," they laughed, as if those words were harmless. It wasn't loud or cruel, it was casual. That's what made it hurt more. If someone spits in your face, at least you know where you stand. But when your own family turns you into an afterthought with a smile, it cuts differently. I remember standing there with the plate in my hand, the steam from the food rising into the cold air. My chair, the one I've sat in every Christmas for as long as I can remember, wasn't where it should have been. It wasn't at the table, near the fireplace, or beside the window where I used to hold Emily on my knee. It was gone. Daniel had one hand resting on the back of Lisa's chair, the way he always does when he wants to look like he's in charge. Lisa leaned back against him, with that practiced smile she puts on whenever company's around. Mark hovered near the tree, pretending to scroll through his phone, pretending not to notice. Then Lisa pointed at the open garage door and said, almost sing-song, "We set you up out there, Dad. More space. Cozy." Cozy, in a cold garage, on Christmas Eve. I stared at the space where my chair should have been. It wasn't just a chair to me. It was where your mother used to pass me the gravy and whisper, "Don't say anything about the turkey being dry." It was where Daniel used to lean his head against my arm before he grew taller than me. It was where Emily sat on my lap last year to hand out the gifts. That chair wasn't just wood and fabric. It was a place in this family. I didn't argue, I tell myself now. I just carried my plate, sat in the cold, and listened. I walked out to that garage, feeling the wind crawl through my jacket like little knives. The floor was cold concrete, the kind that remembers every winter. The door creaked as Lisa shut it behind me, sealing me out of the warmth, out of my own home. Through the wall, I could hear them. Clinking glasses, laughter, Lisa's high-pitched giggle, Daniel's deep chuckle. Even Mark, quiet as he usually is, was laughing along. My family, my blood. Laughing while I sat on a folding chair surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of old paint. I looked at the house through the tiny garage window. I could see the glow of the Christmas lights I hung myself 30 years ago. The same string, patched and repatched over the years, still hanging on, just like me. That house has seen everything. The years when your mother and I barely scraped by. The nights I came home covered in sawdust. The mornings the boys ran down the stairs in pajamas too big for them. Every brick, every window, every nail, I gave it all. And that night, they laughed and pushed me into the cold as if it were nothing. But here's the thing, they didn't know. The house still belonged to me. It wasn't just my name on paper. It was my blood in those walls. They thought they were moving an old man to the garage. They had no idea they were setting the stage for their own eviction. I sat there quietly, fork in hand, letting the cold sting my skin. I didn't rush back in. I didn't beg for a seat at the table. I've learned something over the years. Silence isn't weakness. It's a weapon if you know how to use it. Their laughter echoed through the walls, and I just watched. Because tomorrow it wouldn't be me standing outside. It would be them. "Hello there, this is Grandpa, and I'm grateful you're here with me today. I don't take your time for granted. I know you have your own worries, your own long days, your own quiet nights where the world feels heavy. So sit with me for a moment. Let me tell you something real. This isn't a tale dressed up to look pretty. It's a story with splinters in it. The kind that get under your skin and make you think about the kind of love that forgets its manners and the kind of respect that should never have to ask for permission. I've lived long enough to know that the loudest person at the table isn't always the one in charge. Sometimes the power sits with the one who keeps his voice steady and his eyes clear. That's what I'm trying to do here. Speak clearly, not loudly. I want you to hear the heartbeat under the words, because that's where the truth lives. I'll give you the whole road, not just the signposts. Where it began, where it cracked, where I stood still and let time do the sorting. There will be moments you'll want me to slam a fist, and moments you'll wish I had left sooner. But I stayed, and I watched, and I learned. And now I'm ready to tell it like a confession. The kind a man makes when he's done pretending everything is fine. This house you'll hear me talk about. It's not just a place. It's a promise I kept for decades. It's birthday candles burned low and winter coats drying by the door. It's the thud of boots after a long shift and the smell of coffee at 5 a.m., when the world is still deciding what kind of day it's going to be. I built it nail by nail, and I paid for it bill by bill, and I kept it standing when storms tried to take it. That matters. Not because walls are sacred, but because what you pour your life into deserves a say in how your story ends. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about what happens when people you raised forget the price of the roof over their heads. I'll talk about people who learn to smile for pictures, but not for each other. And I'll talk about the moment a quiet man realizes that silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. There's a difference between being ignored and choosing not to respond. I didn't respond. Not at first. I let the night show me who was who. You'll see why. If you're new here, welcome. You don't owe me anything, but I owe you honesty. If you've been here before, you know how we do this. Not with shouting, not with fancy words, but with steady steps and open eyes. I tell the truth the way I lived it, and I let you take from it what you need. Maybe you need strength. Maybe you need peace. Maybe you just need to hear someone say what you were afraid to admit out loud. That love without respect is just a soft lie, and time has a way of pulling the seams on every lie until it splits. So I'm going to ask you something simple before we dive deeper. Tell me in the comments if anyone has ever made you feel small because of your age, or you're quiet, or because you don't move as fast as you used to. Tell me if someone pushed you to the edges of a room you helped build. Tell me if you've been the one who keeps the lights on while others take the best chair by the fire. I read what you write. I've learned things from strangers that my own family forgot to teach me. I don't want you to feel alone in your own house the way I felt in mine. Not tonight. I'm not here to teach lessons like a schoolmaster, but I'll share what I've learned the hard way. Respect is simpler than people make it. It is how you place a chair at a table. It is how you pass a plate. It is how you say a name. It is whether you remember who paid the price for everything you touch. And when people forget, you don't always correct them with noise. Sometimes you correct them with a key, a deed, and a closed door. I'll show you how that happens without bitterness and without apology. Stay with me. I'll walk you through the little moments that built to the big one. How a cushion became an argument without words. How a whisper became a plan. How a plan became proof. And how proof carried quietly in a jacket pocket became justice at the right time. None of this is about revenge for the sake of it. It's about setting the weight back where it belongs. It's about telling the truth in a way that can't be argued with. So take a breath with me. Settle in. The lights in my memory are still on, and the floorboards still creak the way they always did. I can hear the clink of the glasses from that night, and I can feel the air in the garage the way a man feels winter in his bones. I'm going to take you there, step by step, so you can see what I saw and hear what I heard. And if any part of it feels familiar, speak up in the comments. Your voice matters here. Your story belongs here. And as long as you're listening, I promise to tell this one straight. Now let's go back to that table, and then to that door, and then to that garage. I'll show you exactly where the night turned, and why I didn't have to raise my voice to be heard. My family has a way of looking perfect from the outside. People in town talk about us like we're something out of a holiday movie. The big house on the corner with the old oak tree wrapped in lights. The wide porch with rocking chairs that never creak. The family that eats dinner together on Christmas night. They see smiles in the window, hear music floating into the street, and they think, that must be a warm house. But they don't hear what happens when the music stops. There's my eldest son, Daniel. If confidence had a face, it would be his. He walks into a room like it owes him something. The world has always tilted toward him. He's the kind of man who talks with his chest, never his heart. He used to follow me around the yard when he was little, asking questions about everything I built with my hands. Now he barely looks me in the eye. He wears suits to family dinners as if our table is a boardroom. To the neighbors, he's the golden son. To me, he's a man who's learned how to smile while sharpening the knife behind his back. Then there's Lisa, his wife. If charm were a weapon, hers would be polished to a shine. She's the kind of woman who knows how to make people feel welcome while making you feel like you don't belong at the same time. always perfectly dressed, always speaking softly, never raising her voice. But if you listen closely, there's a blade under every word. She never loved this house. Not really. She loved the status of it. Loved how people whispered about the big property and the family who lived in it. She came into this home like it was a prize. She smiles at me like I'm a temporary piece of furniture. Mark is my youngest. He was always softer than Daniel, kinder too. He used to sneak out to the workshop with me, building little toy boats, painting them in colors his brother called childish. He never liked conflict, and now that he's grown, he's perfected the art of pretending not to see what's in front of him. He nods at everything Daniel says. He stays quiet when Lisa makes her little jabs. He's not cruel, just cowardly in the way people can be when they're afraid to choose a side. And then there's Emily, my granddaughter, the only light left in this house that doesn't flicker. She's 7 years old and sees me, really sees me, the way children do before the world teaches them to look through people instead of at them. She still climbs onto my lap and wraps her arms around my neck like I'm the whole world. She's the only one who still calls the house Grandpa's house. Not Daniel's, not Lisa's, Grandpa's. And maybe that's why I held on so long, because of that small voice that hadn't learned betrayal yet. From the outside, people think we're the picture of a close-knit family. Daniel makes his little speeches at neighborhood barbecues. Lisa waves from the porch like a proud hostess. Mark stands in the background, quiet and agreeable, and I smile, because I've learned that sometimes the mask is easier than the truth. But inside, something has been shifting for years, a cold layer settling under the warmth. You can't always see it, but you can feel it, the way you feel a draft in a room even when the windows are closed. Daniel stopped asking me for advice years ago. Now he gives me instructions in my own house. Lisa rearranged the living room last summer without even asking, like she was claiming the space inch by inch. Mark kept quiet then too, pretending his silence wasn't just another way of helping them. And me? I let it happen, not because I was weak, but because sometimes silence keeps the peace longer than truth does. Sometimes it's easier to watch a storm gather than to stand in the middle of it swinging your fists. But storms don't stop just because you keep quiet. They wait, they grow. They build in the corners where love used to live. And then one day, they take your chair out of the dining room and point you to the garage. I can still remember that night before it happened, how Lisa's laugh carried through the kitchen, sharp and sweet. How Daniel placed his hand on the back of her chair, like a man claiming land that wasn't his. How Mark pretended to scroll on his phone to avoid choosing a side. How Emily tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Grandpa, are you sitting next to me this year?" She didn't know there wouldn't be a place next to her. Not that night. To everyone else, we were the perfect family gathered for a perfect Christmas. But inside that house, something had already cracked. They just didn't know yet that I'd heard it. I didn't buy that house. I built it. Brick by brick, nail by nail. It wasn't handed to me. It was carved out of long nights, sore hands, and quiet determination. I was 30 years old when I first stood on that empty plot, a thin line of frost crawling over the grass, and I told myself, this will be home. I didn't have much back then, just a second-hand truck, a small savings account, and a back that could lift anything. But I had a promise I made to your grandmother long before the kids came along. A promise to build something that would last. Not just a house, but a legacy. The early years weren't easy. I worked 12-hour shifts at the mill, came home smelling like sweat and steel, then spent my nights digging, hammering, sawing until the stars faded. Some nights I slept on the unfinished floor wrapped in an old blanket, just to be up early to keep going. I poured everything into those walls, every dollar I earned, every bit of strength I had. The kitchen? I laid that floor myself on a January night so cold I could see my breath inside. The porch? That was your grandmother's dream. She wanted a place where she could sit in the evenings, knitting, humming along with the wind chimes. I remember the first time she sat out there, barefoot, a warm mug of tea in her hands. She looked at me like I'd hung the stars. That memory alone carried me through more winters than I can count. When Daniel was born, the house was still small. A roof, a couple of rooms, a future waiting to be filled. I remember holding him on the porch, whispering promises into his tiny ear. I told him this house would always be a place he could come back to. When Mark came along, things were harder. Bills piled up. But I still kept building. I fixed every creak, replaced every board, and made sure no storm could touch that roof. And then came the hardest season of my life, the year their mother got sick. We spent months in hospitals, praying for good news that never came. I sold the last piece of the family farm to pay for treatment. That land had been in my family for generations, but none of it mattered more than her. I'd have sold the world if I could. When she passed, it felt like the walls of the house themselves went quiet. Her chair by the fireplace stayed empty for a long time. After she was gone, I didn't tear the house down or move. I fixed it up, kept the light on every night. I did it for them, for Daniel and Mark, so they'd always have a home, so they'd never feel what it's like to lose everything. And for years, I believed they understood that. When Daniel got married, I gave them the upstairs suite rent-free so they could save for their own home. When Mark hit hard times, I covered his debts. I never asked for anything back. Not a cent, not a favor. All I ever wanted was a little respect. A seat at the table. But life has a way of showing you where you stand. All that history, all that work, all those promises. And that night, they looked me in the eye and told me there was no space inside. They didn't just move a chair. They moved the weight of my entire life out to a cold garage. That house is more than wood and bricks. It's the story of everything I sacrificed. And the moment they forgot that, something in me stopped bending. It started before dinner even began. Not with shouting, not with a fight, just a few careless words that sank into me like splinters. That's the thing about betrayal. It rarely kicks down the door. It slips in quietly through the smallest cracks. I came downstairs with my chair cushion tucked under my arm. It's nothing fancy, just an old faded cushion with a pattern worn smooth from years of use. Your grandmother embroidered a little patch on it the winter before she passed. A simple row of flowers. She said, "This will keep your seat warm when I can't." I've used it every Christmas since. It was my small way of keeping her close. I walked into the living room, and Lisa was the first to notice. She wrinkled her nose the way people do when they see something they think is beneath them. "Maybe we should just store that thing in the garage too," she said with a soft laugh. Not loud, not confrontational, just sharp enough to cut. Daniel didn't even look up. He was too busy pouring himself a drink, adjusting the cuff of his shirt like a man rehearsing for a role. Mark stood by the tree, pretending to scroll on his phone, pretending not to hear what she said. That silence was worse than the comment itself. Silence can be a weapon too. It's the kind people use when they don't have the courage to stand next to you. I could have said something then. 100 words sat heavy on my tongue. But I didn't. I forced a small smile, the kind you wear when you know the person in front of you isn't worth the fight. I placed the cushion on the chair closest to the fireplace. The chair that's been mine since the house had barely more than 2 rooms. The same chair where your grandmother used to sit beside me, the fire cracking between us, while the boys ran through the halls wearing paper crowns. But then Daniel looked at me, really looked at me, and said something that changed the air in the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Dad, maybe you can sit somewhere else this year. Lisa wants to make the room a bit more open." Open. That was his word. Not respectful. Not considerate. Just open. As if my presence was clutter. Lisa's hand slid along the back of the chair like it already belonged to her. Mark stayed frozen, like if he didn't move, he wouldn't have to choose a side. I stood there, staring at that chair, and 100 memories came flooding back all at once. Emily sitting on my lap to open her presents. Mark as a boy, falling asleep against my shoulder during Christmas Eve stories. Daniel at 16, trying to act like he wasn't still a child when he helped me hang lights. All of it tied to that one chair. I said nothing. I picked up the cushion, the one thing in that room that still felt like mine, and I stepped aside. Lisa's smile widened. Daniel nodded like a decision had been made. Mark looked away, and I swallowed it. The sting, the disrespect, the quiet, casual way they stripped me of something I had never thought I'd have to defend. I went into the kitchen and busied myself with nothing just to keep my hands from shaking. You can live a whole lifetime believing your family remembers the weight of what you've built, and in one sentence, they can make you feel like you've never mattered at all. I stood by the window, staring out at the falling snow, and whispered to myself, "Remember this." I don't know why I said it out loud. Maybe because some part of me already knew this wasn't just about a chair. It was about everything that chair represented. I didn't realize it then, but that was the first crack. And once a crack forms, it doesn't take long for the whole wall to shift. That night when Lisa laughed and Daniel brushed me aside, I stayed silent. But inside, something changed. I stopped expecting them to see me. I started watching instead. Christmas has a way of showing you who people really are. It's not the grand gestures that reveal the truth. It's the small, quiet moments, the way someone sets a plate, the tone behind a laugh, the way they look at you when they think you're not watching. That night, the cracks I'd tried to ignore for years started widening right in front of me. The table was dressed the way Lisa liked it. Not the way your grandmother used to do it, with mismatched napkins, old wooden plates, and the scent of cinnamon everywhere. No, this was Lisa's kind of Christmas, white and gold. No warmth, just polish. Like a showroom, not a home. She'd even moved the little ceramic angel your grandmother made, the one that sat on the mantel every year. I found it later on a shelf near the laundry room, like a piece of clutter someone had pushed out of the way. Daniel walked around with that air of quiet authority he's gotten so good at, handing out drinks, tapping Lisa on the shoulder like a man who believes the house belongs to him already. Lisa followed behind him, straightening things that didn't need straightening. And Mark floated through the room like a shadow. Never saying anything, never looking directly at me, just keeping his head down and pretending to help. The first moment that burned into me came when Daniel passed out glasses. Everyone got one. Lisa, Mark, even Emily with her little cup of hot cocoa. But when he got to me, he didn't even look in my direction. The last glass sat on the counter. He walked right past it. Not a word. I stood there, watching him, and I knew. It wasn't about a glass. It was about something much bigger. Lisa leaned into him and whispered something, her hand brushing against his sleeve. I didn't hear the words, but I heard the tone. Sharp. Quick. And then they both laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't belong to people who love you. The kind of laugh that belongs to people who've already made a decision about you. Mark poured wine, careful not to spill. He didn't look up. He didn't offer me the glass. He just placed it down at Daniel's seat and stepped back like a servant, not a brother. I looked at him for a long second, hoping he'd lift his eyes and meet mine. He didn't. Then Daniel did something he's done before, but never so brazenly. He walked to the wall with the old family photos, the ones your grandmother loved, the ones that tell our story. The photo of our first Christmas in the house. My hands still covered in sawdust from the porch I was finishing. Your grandmother smiling, holding Daniel as a baby. The photo of me carrying both boys on my back when the roof was finally done. That wall is more than pictures. It's proof of everything I gave. Daniel tapped one of the frames, looked at Lisa and said, "One day, this place will finally be ours. Not ours as a family, ours as in his." Like I was just holding it until he was ready to collect. Lisa laughed softly and replied, loud enough for me to hear, "Oh, I already know where I'd put the new dining table. We'll have to tear down that wall. It'll make everything look bigger." Tear down a wall I built with my own hands. A wall I measured and cut for weeks while your grandmother brought me coffee at midnight. Then Lisa turned, not even pretending to lower her voice anymore, and said, "When are we going to update the deed?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The conversation around me faded into a dull hum. That one sentence stretched the room into something tight and airless. Mark shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. Daniel didn't even glance in my direction. I kept eating, slowly, deliberately. My silence pressed against their laughter like a wall. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't a passing joke or a stray thought. This was a conversation they'd had before. Planned, whispered, built like a house of their own. They thought I was too old, too tired, too gentle to notice. I looked around that table and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. Lisa adjusting a table she didn't pay for. Daniel talking about a deed he didn't earn. Mark staring at his hands like he wanted to disappear. And I sat there, calm, listening, remembering every single word. I didn't interrupt. I didn't slam my hand down. I just let them keep talking, unaware they were giving me every piece of the puzzle I needed. They thought I was finished, but I was just beginning. There's a silence that lives in houses like mine. It's not the kind that comforts you, like the hush after a storm. It's the kind that listens. It remembers. It carries whispers through the walls. That night after dinner, when everyone moved into the living room, their laughter returned like nothing had happened. But something in me had already shifted. I started noticing things I used to let pass. The way Daniel glanced at Lisa before speaking. The way Lisa held onto his arm a little too tightly, like they shared a secret. The way Mark hovered near the doorway, not wanting to be part of any of it, but too afraid to step away. I took my time hanging up my coat in the hallway. There's a little creak in the floorboard by the closet, always has been. The house talks when you walk on it. I paused, and that's when I heard it. Daniel's voice. Low. Firm. The way he talks when he doesn't want me to hear. Once it's transferred, we can remodel everything, he said. Transferred. That word sliced through the quiet like a blade. Lisa answered softly, like a woman laying claim to something that was never hers. We'll finally make it ours. I pressed my hand against the wall, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. That wall had held me up through harder nights than this. When their mother died, I leaned against that same patch of drywall and promised her I'd keep this house standing for them. And now those same children, the ones who grew up under this roof, were talking about transferring it, like I was already gone. Lisa's laugh was light, almost musical. Daniel chuckled. It wasn't the laugh of people remembering good times. It was the laugh of people celebrating a plan. I stayed still, careful not to make the floor creak. I'd learned a long time ago that when people think you're not listening, they'll tell you everything you need to know. Daniel's voice lowered again. He's old, Lisa. He'll give in eventually. He always does. He doesn't need this place anymore. He said it like I was a coat hanging in the closet. Something useful once, now ready to be folded away. I walked down the hall with steady steps, not toward them, away. Because rage can be loud, but power, real power, often moves in silence. I went into my room and closed the door softly. My room. The only part of that house they hadn't yet tried to claim. I walked straight to the little wooden box beneath my bed. It's nothing fancy, just a box with a brass latch. Your grandmother gave it to me the year we paid off the mortgage. I kept everything that mattered in there. The original deed, insurance documents, her letters, the kind of papers people forget exist until they need them. I pulled it out, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened it. Everything was there, except something was off. The papers weren't in the order I always keep them. The edges were slightly bent, the envelope flap creased. Someone had opened it. Someone had gone through my life. I placed my hand on the deed, feeling the indent of years on the paper. I remembered the day we signed it, the ink on my fingers, the pride in my wife's smile. That paper meant more than ownership. It meant I built something out of nothing. And they'd touched it like it was just another piece in their game. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. I've lived a long life, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. People who scheme always think they're smarter than the one they're scheming against. Daniel and Lisa saw my gray hair and quiet voice as weakness. They saw silence and mistook it for surrender. But I was listening, and the house was listening with me. I put the box back carefully. I didn't confront them. Not that night. Because sometimes you don't stop a snake by stepping on it right away. You let it slither out into the open where everyone can see what it really is. I walked out of that room and down the hallway. I could see them sitting in the living room through the sliver of the doorway. Daniel with his feet up like he owned the place, Lisa draped across the armrest, Mark staring into nothing, trying to disappear. They didn't even look at me. That was the part that stung the most. Not the plotting, not the greed, but how easy it was for them to erase me from my own house. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed until the house grew still again. My hands didn't shake anymore. My mind was sharp, clear. The whisper of the word transferred was still echoing in my ears, but it didn't break me. It woke me up. Night has a way of stripping away all the distractions. Once the house goes quiet, you can hear everything that truly matters. That night, the kind of quiet I felt wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It sat on my chest like a weight I couldn't ignore anymore. The hallway light Lisa left on cast long shadows through the house. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock in the living room. I'd heard that clock tick since the day I hung it there with my own hands. That sound used to bring comfort. That night, it felt like a countdown. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. I'm not a man who moves in haste. I've learned patience the hard way, through winters that wouldn't end, bills that took years to pay, and grief that never fully leaves. But that night, something sharper than patience rose in me. Something quiet, solid, unshakable. I reached under the bed and slid out the old wooden box. It's not big, not impressive, just a simple box with a brass latch that's tarnished with time. Your grandmother gave it to me after we paid off the mortgage, and I've kept everything important inside it since. Documents that could tell the story of my entire life. The deed to the house, insurance papers, her letters, her wedding band wrapped in cloth. But what caught my eye that night wasn't what I'd put in there. It was what I hadn't. Tucked between the deed and my wife's old letter was an envelope that didn't belong. Crisp, fresh, folded too neatly to be mine. My name was written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on every thank you card he never meant, every note he signed with fake warmth for other people. But this wasn't a card. It was a plan. I opened it carefully. No anger, no rush, just steady hands and a quiet mind. Inside was a printout from a lawyer's office, a property transfer draft. Daniel and Lisa's names were listed as future owners. My name was at the top, as if I'd already agreed. Like they'd already made the decision for me. There was more. Notes in Daniel's handwriting. He'll agree. He won't fight, just needs to sign. That line, those few words burned deeper than any insult ever could. Not because of the plan, but because of the certainty. They were so sure I'd just hand it over. So sure I was weak. So sure I was done. I sat there in the quiet, the paper trembling slightly in my hand, not because I was afraid, but because I was remembering. I remembered the day Daniel was born. How small his hand was when I held it for the first time. How I'd sworn to protect him. I remembered the night Lisa first stepped into this house, all smiles and sweet words, hugging me like a daughter. I remembered Mark, sitting beside me on the porch, telling me he never wanted this house to change, and here they were, planning to take it. Like I was nothing more than an obstacle in their way. I folded the paper slowly, tucked it inside the inner pocket of my jacket, and buttoned it closed. My heart was steady. No shouting, no crying, just silence. A silence that held something they'd forgotten I still had, power. Then I reached back into the box and pulled out the original deed, the one with my signature on it, the one that still held the ink from that day long ago. My name, no one else's. I ran my fingers over it like a man touching a scar that had healed but never faded. I thought about your grandmother. About the nights we stayed up late, counting dollars, making plans, dreaming about how this house would always be for the family. We built it on trust, on hard work, on love. But trust doesn't protect you from betrayal. It only makes the knife sink deeper when it comes from your own. I put everything back in the box except the transfer letter. That one stayed in my pocket, because proof isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to be carried quietly until the right moment comes. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. The house was sleeping, but it still knew me. It creaked in familiar places, not warning me, but standing with me. This house had seen me at my best and my worst. It had watched my children grow, and it would watch this through too. I stopped at the kitchen table, looking at the empty seat where my chair should have been. The same spot where Lisa had laughed earlier, where Daniel had spoken about the deed like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. I placed my hand on the table and whispered, "Let them laugh tonight. They won't be laughing tomorrow." I didn't storm into their rooms. I didn't wake anyone up. I didn't need to. A man who has proof doesn't rush. He waits. And that night, the house and I waited together. I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, the letter still tucked inside my jacket, my hand resting on the old wooden table. It was the same table where we'd shared so many Christmas dinners over the years. Birthdays, quiet breakfasts, arguments, laughter. It had felt like the center of our family. But that night, it felt different, like a battlefield that no one else realized was about to be marked. The snow outside was still falling. You could hear it in the quiet, a soft hush against the windows, the kind of night that should have felt peaceful. But peace isn't the same when you're sitting alone in your own home, realizing the people you love the most are already planning a future without you in it. That letter in my pocket, it was more than paper. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't just imagining the way Lisa's smile felt colder these days. Proof that Daniel's sudden concern about my health wasn't love, but leverage. Proof that Mark's silence was the silence of someone who'd already decided it was safer to step aside than stand beside me. I've seen a lot of things in my life. I've lost people I loved. I've buried dreams. I've held hands with grief. But nothing quite stings like realizing your own children have decided you're no longer part of the story you built. And I want to ask you something right now. Not as a storyteller, but as a man who lived this moment. If it were you sitting there, in the dead of night, holding proof that the people you raised were planning to take everything you built, what would you have done? Would you have stormed into the living room, flipped the lights on, slammed the letter down, and demanded answers? Would you have let your anger roar so loudly that it shook the walls? Or would you have done what I did? Sat in the quiet, breathed, listened to the house that knew you best, waited for the right moment. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's precision. You see, people who plot against you expect anger. They expect noise. They expect weakness hiding behind rage. What they never expect is patience, calm, calculation. I could have shouted. I could have thrown the letter at Daniel's smug face. I could have told Lisa to get out of my house right then and there. I could have begged Mark to remember the promises we once made on that porch. But if I had done any of that, they would have seen me as an old man trying to fight a losing battle. But I'm not losing. Not yet. Not ever. And that's where I turn this question back to you. Have you ever had a moment where someone crossed a line so quietly that the world didn't even notice? But you did? Have you ever had proof burning a hole in your pocket and you had to decide whether to shout or to wait? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story, not just the hurt, the choice. Because this is the part that matters, not the betrayal itself, but what you choose to do next. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the window, at the snow building up on the porch I built with my own hands. I whispered to myself, you started this house with patience. You'll defend it the same way. The clock ticked in the living room. Every second felt sharper, clearer, and as I sat there, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't the old man they thought I was. I was the man who still held the deed, the man who still knew every nail, every brick, every memory in these walls. So I ask you one more time, if it were you, would you have shouted, or would you have waited? That night, I made my choice, and that choice would change everything. The next evening carried a strange kind of quiet. It wasn't the soft, warm quiet of a holiday home. It was the quiet before a storm, the kind the air holds when it knows something is coming. I woke early, drank my coffee alone, and listened to the creaks of the house. It's funny. After decades, you start to learn how your home sounds when it's unsettled. The floorboards groan different. The pipes hum lower. The walls carry things. I spent most of the day keeping to myself. I fixed the hinge on the back door, swept the porch, folded some old winter blankets, just like I always do. Daniel thought I was avoiding him. Lisa thought I was too old to care. Mark was too busy pretending nothing was happening to think anything at all. And that was fine by me, because nothing unsettles people with bad intentions more than silence. By evening, the house began to fill with noise again. Lisa put on her music, not the kind your grandmother loved, the soft jazz that used to dance through these halls. No, Lisa played that cold, modern stuff that fills space but never warms it. Daniel walked around like the king of a place he hadn't earned, tapping his fingers on the wall as if measuring what he would change when I was gone. Mark stood by the window again, looking out like he didn't belong to either side. And then came dinner. The table looked like a showroom. White tablecloth, perfectly folded napkins. Not a single hint of the mismatched plates your grandmother loved. It felt like a stage, and Daniel was the man stepping into the lead role. Lisa placed my plate at the far end of the table, closer to the door than to the family, closer to outside than inside. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. The same message they'd sent when they moved my chair to the garage. Just a little louder now. Daniel cleared his throat, that fake professional sound he always makes when he wants to control the room. He stood, and I watched his hand rest on the chair that used to be mine. "Dad," he started, wearing a polite smile like a mask, "we've been talking about making some changes around here." I set my fork down slowly. That kind of slowness makes people nervous. It tells them you're listening, even when you're not saying a word. "The house is too big for you alone," Daniel continued, voice smooth like a man trying to sell something. "We've talked to a lawyer. This can be done clean, simple. It's time to put it under our name." He said our name, like I wasn't sitting 5 feet away, like I'd already been erased. Lisa leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand like a woman pretending to care. "It'll make things easier for everyone," she said sweetly. "You won't have to worry about bills or repairs. We'll handle everything. Everything. My house, my life, my history. You'll still live here, of course," Daniel added quickly. "It's not like we're kicking you out." The way he said it told me everything. They already had a timeline in their heads, a plan for how I'd fade out quietly. Mark stared at his plate, his hands fidgeted in his lap. He didn't say a word. I didn't shout. I didn't even let my face change. I just leaned back in my chair, hands folded. Lisa's eyes flicked toward Daniel, confused that I wasn't reacting the way they expected. Daniel's fingers tightened around his glass. He cleared his throat again. Lisa leaned closer, her voice all sugar. "Think of it as a gift, Dad. We're just protecting the future. Protecting it from me," she meant. I looked at her for a long moment, then at Daniel, then at Mark. I let the silence fill every corner of that room. Mark finally glanced up, and for a second I saw a flicker of guilt. He knew what they were doing was wrong. But guilt without courage is useless. I picked up my fork again, stabbed a piece of potato, and said, quietly and evenly, "Eat your dinner." Daniel blinked. Lisa's smile twitched at the edges. They expected resistance. They expected anger. Instead, they got stillness. Stillness unsettles people who are building their lives on shaky ground. Lisa forced a laugh, trying to drag the mood back into her control. Daniel tried to act unfazed, but his eyes kept darting toward me, and Mark just sank back into his chair like he wanted to disappear. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that while they sat there thinking they had the upper hand, the letter was still folded neatly in my pocket. The deed was still locked away in my box, and the power they thought they'd taken from me still belonged to me. I didn't need to shout to remind them. I just needed to wait, because when a man has the truth, time works in his favor, and mine was coming. The house was quiet again. Snow had settled on the porch roof like a white blanket, soft but heavy. It was the kind of stillness where even the ticking of the clock sounds louder than it should. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but you could feel it pressing against the edges of the night. I could feel it in my bones. The next evening, dinner started the same way as before. Lisa floated through the kitchen with that fixed smile, like she was hosting a dinner party instead of staging a coup. Daniel wore that smug ease of a man who believed everything was falling into place. Mark followed along, silent, trying to avoid choosing a side, even though silence is a side. Lisa passed plates like she was distributing favors. Daniel made small talk with the same hollow charm that used to fool me when he was younger. Emily giggled as she played with the ribbon from her hair, not knowing that everything around her was quietly unraveling. She was the only light in that room untouched by greed. I let them speak first. I always let them speak first. You learn a lot that way. Daniel cleared his throat, just like the night before. "Dad," he said with that politician's tone, "Lisa and I have been talking again. I think we can make this transition smooth. No lawyers, no stress, just family." Lisa tilted her head and added softly, "We want this to be easy on you. You've done enough." Easy on me. The way she said it made my teeth ache. Mark's fork scraped against his plate, the loudest sound from him all night. He didn't look up. I leaned back in my chair slowly, letting my weight press against the wood. I didn't speak. I didn't nod. Silence is a strange kind of mirror. It makes people fill in the empty spaces with their own guilt. Daniel started shifting in his seat. Lisa's smile tightened. Then, slowly, I reached into my jacket. Their eyes followed the movement like they already knew something was wrong. I didn't pull the letter out dramatically. I didn't slam it down. I just laid it flat on the table, right between the mashed potatoes and Lisa's polished fingernails. The silence in that room changed. It wasn't soft anymore. It was sharp. Lisa's hand froze midair. Daniel's smirk faltered for the first time all week. I looked at them and said in the same steady tone I'd used to comment on the weather, "Funny how people make plans in houses that aren't theirs." Daniel blinked. "What's this supposed to mean?" he asked. But his voice didn't carry the same confidence anymore. It cracked on the edges. Lisa opened her mouth, closed it, then leaned back slowly like someone trying to regain balance. I didn't give them anything more than that. I just looked at them, one by one. Daniel? Lisa? Mark? I let that single sentence sit on the table like a loaded gun no one wanted to touch. Lisa finally broke the silence. "You're misunderstanding?" she said softly. "We just want to make sure everything is in order for the future. We're not." I held up a hand, just a simple gesture. It shut her up faster than yelling ever could. Mark finally whispered, "Dad." His voice was thin, like he was walking on ice. I leaned forward, folded the letter back up, slid it back into my jacket, and said, "Eat your dinner." And that was it. I didn't reveal everything, not yet, just a hint, a shadow of what I knew, just enough to shake the ground beneath their feet. Daniel's jaw tightened. Lisa forced her fork to her mouth, chewing like someone who couldn't taste a thing. Mark stared at the table, like it might swallow him whole. Emily, bless her, just hummed softly to herself, swinging her legs from her chair, too young to understand how a single folded paper can tilt a whole house. That's the thing about power. It's not about how loud you speak. It's about when you choose to let others know you've been listening all along. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to accuse. I just needed them to know something had shifted. And from the way Daniel didn't finish his glass of wine, I knew they felt it. The morning after Christmas, the air felt different, cold, sharp, but clean. The kind of cold that wakes up the truth. I woke up before the sun, long before the house stirred. I've always been an early riser. It's something years of hard work carve into your bones. But that morning, I didn't brew coffee to watch the sunrise. I got dressed, pulled on my coat, and slipped the folded transfer letter into my pocket. The house was still, unaware of the storm that was finally coming its way. I took one last look at the living room. Their decorations, Lisa's neat little table setting, the lights that I had put up long before she came into the picture. I whispered to the walls, the same way I used to talk to my wife when no one else was listening. Today, we take this back. I drove into town, my old truck crunching over the frosted road. I know every bump and bend between this house and my lawyer's office. I've known it for years, because a smart man doesn't wait until he's pushed out to prepare for a storm. I'd already updated the deed months before. Daniel didn't know that. Lisa didn't either. I'd also signed another document, one that made sure my house couldn't be touched by anyone but me. That little letter Daniel left in my box, it wasn't a threat. It was proof. Proof they thought they could corner me. By the time the sun crept up, everything was in motion. Locks changed, legal protections activated. What they thought they were going to take had already been sealed away. When I pulled back into the driveway, their cars were gone. Shopping trip, of course. Lisa loved her Boxing Day sales, and Daniel loved pretending he was the man of the house when I wasn't around. It was the perfect silence to work in. I walked up to the porch, the one I built with my own hands, slid the new keys into the door, and heard the sound of the old locks falling away. It was like the house itself exhaled after holding its breath for too long. When they finally came home in the late afternoon, bags in their hands and smiles on their faces, they found something they weren't prepared for. Daniel reached for the doorknob. It didn't turn. He rattled it once, twice, then harder. The sound was like music to me. Lisa frowned. She jiggled the handle like it would magically recognize her. I opened the door slowly and stepped onto the porch, my coat buttoned, my hands steady. Their faces shifted the second they saw me stand, a